So then are we ready to just kind of get started?
I think so.
All right. Okay, so what I wanted to do today is go over monitoring elements and how to use monitoring elements, both how to use them, how to set them up. And then I'm hoping that goes really fast. And then we can discuss essentially monitoring elements and how, like, different ways that you guys want to use them. And then Jen can talk about ways that they're using them. So we're on the demo version of Ouzel, which just has a lot of fake data in it. And so this is sort of a hybrid of fake data. This is a park near my house, essentially, this Mount Tabor. But if we were to click over to the monitoring elements, we would see I've got these 6 monitoring elements, and they are all random for the most part. They have some nice labels and things on them, but you'll see the descriptions are just random gibberish. So don't let that confuse you. It's just essentially laziness on my part. So these are the monitoring elements. The purpose of the monitoring elements are so that you can add custom monitoring for compliance types of things. So this is kind of geared towards your compliance monitoring. And you can kind of think of it as, like, if you were to want to develop a custom form for monitoring in the field with custom questions and input and everything, this is where you would do it. You would do it with the monitoring elements. And so when we go out into the field for Mount Tabor, we would see these 6 questions, these 6 different monitoring elements to observe. So, but from the desktop, what we're looking at is we have these cards, these are my little Monopoly cards, with basic information about the monitoring elements. And so we're looking at this first one: describe current land use practices on easement lands. And so what we see is the type of monitoring element, or the label and description of the monitoring element, when it was last observed, when's it going to be required again, the average, basically the most observed value, and we'll get more into that in a second, and then how many observations we've actually seen. Down here, we see that this is a observation type of logical. It just means simply that you're expecting somebody to say yes or no to this particular thing. So describe current land use, it might not necessarily fit with my random thing, but we can look at the Columbia Land Trust ones as well here in a second. If I click on this plus sign, I can see the form that is generated, and here's that logical part, the yes, no. It's basically, have there been any changes in these practices from the last monitoring, yes or no, and then optional notes. And so you would save this stuff here, and then everything would update. One of the things you should notice is it says now it's required again in a year. So basically, the way that is set up is I can tell it that I'm expecting this thing on a max interval of a year. And the purpose of this is so that we can say, okay, this particular observation doesn't need to be, every year. It could just be every 5 years. And it makes it easier for us to say, okay, well, show me all of the sites that have a monitoring element that's going to need to be monitored this year. So it kind of helps us create those filters. If we were to click on it, select it, we would see again, the overview, but then we could see all of the different observations right here. And so another example, a good example, one that has a lot more data probably would be, we'll go to, sorry, Jen, I'm going to show off equality.
That's fine. With the caveat that we'll talk about, this is all migrated data from our old system, which I had really hoped to go in and tidy up and make beautiful for you for this session, and that did not happen.
Yeah, so here is, as Jen said, this is data that we migrated over, and so kind of took what they were doing and shoehorned it into the Ouzel stuff. And so if we look at, say, this one right here, we have 5 observations. They have, instead of the yes or no for this particular element type, they have a rank type, which is none, management concern, or potential violation. So in theirs, when you click on the plus, the form just changes a little bit, and we see management concern and potential violation. And so this is what the user would see if they were out in the field and they were entering an observation for this particular element. So these elements, and I could stay right here. These elements come from restrictions. And so those restrictions are over in the restrictions section. And so the restriction can have a number of monitoring elements or just one. This one happens to not have any. None of these have, there we go. So this one has 12 elements. So basically the way we migrated all of this data over is we just basically tied all of the elements to one little restriction. And then they've slowly kind of gone through and added some more restrictions. And so you can do it either way, however you guys want to do it. But you can see here's all of the different elements based on this particular restriction. The restrictions themselves are actually tied to sources. And so you could create a source, and then that source would have restrictions. The source would be tied to parcels, and then those restrictions would have the monitoring element. So you can kind of see that hierarchy, that essentially, and why it's related to compliance monitoring. I mean, you create a source. The source could be something like a lease, or an agreement. It could be a management plan. You could then define what parcels it should apply to. And I've made a change to parcels that we can talk about in a second. And that would identify, what property everything shows up under. And then it's just a matter of going through and filling out your restrictions or your elements, making your observations. So I'll show you from the mobile. Let's see, can you see the mobile form now? Okay. So this is back to the demo version, or the demo data and the mobile app. And so from the mobile app, you would select, say, let me get Mount Tabor on here. Do not have Tabor.
I just went through this. It's because you already have Amaranth Plantain out there.
Yeah. How often I use this. Okay, so from the mobile app, you would click over here to the monitoring observations, and then it would show you all of your list of elements. If you click on a particular element, it will show you all of your observations that you have ever done on this particular element. You could click on any one of them and it will show you the detail, the various notes and things like that. Or you can click on this plus and you would get this form again to enter a new observation. And so pretty straightforward, reasonably simple. So
Chris, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
I'm wondering if, I think we should look maybe at something like Bankston, one of the easements. And then sure. I'm wondering if you could also talk a little bit about the other types of, because, yes. When we migrated our data, there was basically just this rank type with built off of the way that we do it. But Chris has now added these other types of monitoring elements. So there's a lot more flexibility now. And I would say our data has not yet been updated to reflect the increased functionality. But I think it can get a little confusing on the fee properties, but it feels a little cleaner on the easements where we have conservation easement restriction. The source of that is, either the cluster of restrictions for an easement, or you could break it out. The source is the easement, and then you have monitoring elements to monitor the restrictions and reserved rights of that easement.
Right. And so if we go back here, like these are the demo again, but each of these different, you can see that the natural catastrophic events, this is a logical yes, no value. This one is simply numeric. So there's different types. And we can see that if we go here, that we've got logical, text, rank, continuous. And what that basically means is just the data you're going to enter. And so if your element is simply, hey, do you see dumping out there? Then a simple logical would work where you show a form and they're going to say yes or no. If you wanted to do something like how much square footage of building do you see out there, then you would do something numeric, which would be like this one right here, where the value that they enter is going to be a number. And so they're going to put something in there. And you can specify the units for it. Columbia, but pretty much all their stuff is doing is a rank value. And it's a rank value is kind of like low, medium, or high. Theirs is potential, concern, violation. And that is seen right here. Here's an example: absent, rare, and common. And then we can also do purely categorical, which I don't have an example of here, but it's basically the same as rank, but there's no relationship amongst the actual values. The text is basically, there's no value and you're just going to fill comments out. It actually just shows you the comment field and you don't put any value in there. So most of the time I would think you would have some value that you'd put in. You'd probably not use this one very often, especially when all of them give you that notes field to actually put information into. And then Bankston. And so what did you want to specifically?
Oh, I just think this is helpful because you can see that linkage easier. So these are, so in this instance, because this was migrated, I believe, although I haven't looked at this in a while, that it's probably linked to one restriction. So you could look, Chris, that is the easement, right? So well, in this case, we need to update this. So this was just migrated as a group. But there should be one source that is the easement. We could determine, I think Chris just put management plan in the code on everything.
I did.
And so you can see we haven't cleaned up our data yet. But we could choose to, in restrictions, break them out in restrictions and build a monitoring element off of those. If we ever wanted to say, show me all of the properties that have a restriction of this type, and then let's look at where it's been violated. Maybe not. Or you just do it like we've migrated here, where you have the, if you go back to the monitoring elements, you have the monitoring elements, which are based explicitly off of the reserved rights and restrictions. The description includes any information you need. And then that's what we're looking at each year. And, historically we would carry like a bulleted list or the easement or the baseline and, just sort of a blank form with some prompts, but we wouldn't have such a detailed, okay, for this site, this is what the restriction around herbicide is. This is what the restrictions around alteration of water courses, etc. And of course, a lot of them in our easements are very similar, but some of them are different, particularly when it comes to reserved rights. And with those other monitoring element types, one thing that we haven't done yet, but I would like us to do, is for things like we have some agricultural easements where the sort of heavy lift in that monitoring is tracking impermeable surface, allowable building within the building envelopes, et cetera. And so we can start to use some of these other types to track those surface areas or areas, as opposed to just having everything in narrative or squirreled away in GIS.
Yes. So I'm going to now just show you how to create them all, essentially. Show you how to go about doing it. Oh, I do want to point out, I made a change to the parcels. You'll see as we talk about this, that all of these things ultimately go back to a source. And then when you look at the source, that's tied to restrictions, and that is tied to a parcel. And so the change that I have made to parcels is that now the parcels can be of different types. And so it's not just meaning a tax lot. So a tax lot is a special type of parcel, but you can create an easement that is a parcel. You can create a management unit that's a parcel. And therefore you can basically use the parcels as our restriction boundaries, essentially. We could create a zone if we wanted to. And that way you can tie these specific monitoring elements to specific parcels and have different parcels, different elements for different parcels, have them all show up in your property, all that kind of thing. So,
and just in this context, a parcel is just a spatial extent of something. Right, an area. So in the example,
it's an area of land.
Yeah, you could look at the Equality one as a good example of where we would do that in the future, where we have different encumbrances that have different spatial extents, which we probably should be monitoring. That, you know, we haven't necessarily, other than just in that group, to like see any changes.
So yeah, so here's Equality. There's which looks like this, and the different parcels are, you can kind of see with that boundary line there. And then I was on parcels. I'm just trying to remember where I just was.
Yeah, if you wanted to go to, you could see it with the management unit, but if you went to the maps and added our encumbrances lines.
Yeah,
anyway,
hold on one second.
Nice. Yeah.
So then this is the parcel workspace. And what we see is that this is a tax lot. And so this parcel is a tax lot. There are restrictions on it, or there are no restrictions currently. It has tax payments. There's a map that you can see. This is the actual tax lot right there. But then we have this one over here, and this is a management unit. And so it's a parcel. It's like Jen said, it's an extent of land. It has a number of restrictions on it because a lot of the restrictions, like I said, migrated over. We linked them to this. And then, you know, there's an overview, and this is of type management unit as opposed to a tax lot. So we don't see the payment information that we see for a tax lot. And with this new introduction of different parcel types, we've allowed you to create your own attributes for the different parcel types. And so if you want to create a specific type of attribute for all management unit parcel types, you can. Same with the easements and with the tax lots. So and we'll go back to the demo here. Let's say that I wanted to create a new monitoring element. I could go over to the monitoring elements page, the workspace, and use this little plus sign that's up here, and I would get the monitoring element form. And when I get the form, the first thing I've got to do is decide what restriction that it applies to. And so there's only one restriction that's available from this particular one. So I picked that one. We'll go over to equality here in a second where there's a lot more stuff. Then I'm going to pick the observation type, and I'm going to say that this one is continuous. I'm going to give it a label, and the label is for reference within OOSL. So like you see it, like if you got to pick it from a drop down or show it in a menu or something like that, that's where that label is going to be used. And so I'll put something in there. This is where I would put in more detail to say, help the user really understand what the restriction is, and then, or what the monitoring element is supposed to be capturing. And then finally, the question that should appear on your monitoring form. And so this is continuous. And so maybe I put estimated square footage of building. And so then that is there. It's been added. There are no current observations for it. And we can click on this to put in an observation. It'll record the date. We can change that if you want, like say you're back entering data, you can change that. It will also record who is entering it, like the person that's currently logged in. And then save, and we have all of that. Now, if you wanted to add more data to that, like say you wanted to change the timing, you can click over to this tab and say that it's going to be, it's active. We can specify whether it's required or not, or optional. And I must say that the required, like it's really hard to force somebody to enter a monitoring element. So the required kind of just comes into play when, you know, searching, like show me all the required elements. And in the special case of the monitoring element tool, where we can put a bunch of monitoring elements in front of a user with a project, we can say that tool is not finished until all the required ones are done. But that's really the only place the required essentially works. You know, it does something. And then there's this required each visit. And so we can change that. And actually, my demo, I think, is out of date. And so I'm going to flip over to here and show, because guess not. The required each visit. And then in this particular example, we're seeing these options. And so that's because this one is rank, and therefore you have to put in your own custom options. And so one of the options that they're actually missing is something like none observed. And so I can add that, and then I can reorder it so that none observes shows up first, and then save it, and it's all set. So pretty straightforward once you have your restrictions created and all that. So what do we do though if we do not have, say, your restrictions done, or maybe it's a brand spanking new source or something? You can do it straight from here. You would start here again. You can see all of the various restrictions, but then I have this link up here where I can just simply add a new restriction. And so this new restriction, I would specify the source. And so I could say, this is my source. Sorry, I really don't want to add anything to Columbia.
It's okay. So, as long just make it absurd, and then we'll just clean it up. I have to go in here and fix it all anymore.
Well, let's just do it. So I can come over here and I can add a new restriction, and then I can choose the existing source, or I could simply say I want to add a new source. And then when I add a new source, I'm going to be able to put the label in there and tie it to a parcel, and put in the source types and do all of that. In mine, the source type, so we put label, all this stuff that I have to, I'm going to just pick an existing source. And so the main thing here is that we haven't discussed is this use. So for all the restrictions, tied to some sort of use. And that's thought of like as a land use type of thing. And so that is developed by your organization. So each organization can come up with their own lists of uses. I only have the 4 in here for this demo version. And typically you could just pick, general. And I'll show you where you can create all of your uses here in a second. Then the last part would be simply allowed, prohibited, or regulated. And this is where I think sometimes the restriction thing, as far as the way that I think of it, differs from the way, say, Jen thinks of it. And so a restriction is a rule, essentially. And so we could say that a particular land use is allowed for everyone based upon this Mount Tabor management plan starting today and perpetual, and then I can add, my text. But I could also say that it is prohibited, and then it will show up with a big red thing saying it's prohibited. And then finally, I have this option of regulated. And the idea behind regulated is you would expect to basically someone asks permission, and then you would create an approval for them. But again, sort of analogous to the required thing, it's not like we can force people to make the approvals and various things like that. So it's all a matter of how much bookkeeping you guys do. Then we save it, and now that restriction exists in there, and then we go and we can proceed and create the different the monitoring element, just like we described earlier. And so we would do all those things the same way. In this particular case, I chose rank, so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add a few things. Red and green. I save it, and if I wanted to make an observation on it, here it is. It's all ready to go. And so it really, how you create these is going to be a function of essentially how much effort you want to put into it. I mean, you could very easily just create one source, call it, the source of all restrictions, create one restriction, and then create a bunch of monitoring elements that you want your people in the field to be able to enter. Or you could get very explicit and outline every single restriction, identify every single source, put in all the documentation. It really is up to you guys. When we do elevate something to an issue, the issue then can be linked back to that restriction. So if you wanted to be very explicit and define things that way, it does probably become helpful down the road. So it's kind of a balance of doing a bunch of work up front versus doing more work maybe down the road. It's hard to say. So I also added all of this over to, let's see, do I have the help? Yeah. Over into the help files. And I added the search thing up to the help so that you could say search for restriction. Here are all of the help entries that have to do with restrictions. And I've made a couple, like, for example, these restriction sources that kind of goes over everything I just spoke of. So you can go in, you can look, read this, If you have any questions, you can always shoot me an email, ask me. All of this stuff is then linked to other things related to restrictions, like everything about what is a restriction. I tried to explain what each of the different data types are, or each of the pieces of information you have to add, and then walk you through creating a restriction, creating a monitoring element, all of those different parts. So everything should be right in there. So if you ever run into any trouble, you can check over into the help file. And then if you still have questions, simply contact me and ask me, and I'm happy to help. So is there anything else I should talk about, Jen, before we just kind of open it up to people's opinion? So
I feel like I had something, but it's eluding me right now. So I feel like we should open it up and it'll come back to me.
Yeah. So with that, we'll just open it up.
I have some questions.
All right.
Great.
So if you are adding a new monitoring element, is there a way to, like the way you just showed us, you were adding it to a property, right? To Mount Peter. Is there a way to add a new monitoring element to all properties, or do you have to do it property by property? If there was like
you would have to do it, you'd have to do it property by property. Because one thing to keep in mind is that the observation, you would want it to be for that area, essentially. But Jen and I were talking about ways in which we could make that easier, essentially, like have a monitoring element template or something that we could then say, apply this to all properties. If in the meantime, if you have, say, a particular element you want to just add to all properties, I could probably help you and just do it via code until we get those other tools created.
Yeah, we were just talking about that was, and thank you, Melissa, that was one of the things that I thought of and then forgot. We were talking about, because Austin was just doing this for a new property, and he just wanted to copy a bunch of elements over from a different property, but we don't have that ability right now. So, you can sort of fake it a little bit by opening the other property, the other tab, and doing a little copy and pasting to streamline your workflow. But I think that's what Chris and I were talking about, is how can we make it so that you go in, but maybe you can say, okay, here's a property that's similar. I want to bring these over, and then I just have to edit my sources or restrictions, et cetera, that are specific to that property. Yeah, so I think that's going to be a big one.
Cool. Yeah, I asked that because when we were in one of your properties, Jen, I liked the monitoring element that you guys have about looking at like how visible are boundary signs, and I forget what it was, like walking boundaries and observations of existing signs, and something like that I would imagine, apply to all properties for most land use. So
yeah, we were thinking too of like creating that like sort of a library of elements that are in the cloud, kind of like our help documentation is there, where people can just, instead of importing it from another one of their properties, but import it from this collection that we have online. And so we'll keep that in mind as well, because then we can just put a whole bunch of them up there. So
that'd be sweet. In the meantime, when you create one of those elements, being able to have a checkbox next to it that adds it to your own library or menu of options, so that you can decide, okay, yeah, this is one that I want to be able to get to from all my properties, or hey, this is a special one, I'm not going to check that box.
So you're thinking like create an element and then you basically add it to your library of templates, so to speak.
Yeah. So when I go to the next property, I can just boom, that one's now there, accessible from any property. I can add that to any property very easily. Or if I haven't checked that box, it's just special to this property.
Right.
Yeah, I could see being able to search sort of thematically too. So say we're getting really explicit and we have some sort of road use agreement or farming license, and there's certain things that perhaps we're not really explicitly checking when we monitor, but we probably should be making some notes around that, that would be something you could easily search for.
Yeah, so we were thinking the other day, like from this form, the part that's specific to Atfaldy Prairie here would be the restriction. But the rest of it, we feel like we could import it from somewhere else. And so if we had another tab over here that basically was like, okay, find this monitoring element that we want to import, that we could click over to that. Maybe it would show that list that Morgan's talking about, you know, with the ones that were checked. Maybe it shows the ones that are in our cloud. Maybe it provides you with a search so that you can just find one you know you created. I think like Jen's talking about, I created it for Bankston. Let's find it. And then that would basically just import it into here and you move on, and it's all set up. So that sounds appealing to everyone.
Yeah, in the long run, probably helpful, but particularly helpful for onboarding, migrating a bunch of properties in, just be able to get them all in comparatively fast, particularly if there's common language.
Yeah, we're thinking of, so here's it's like the monitoring element, but when you're at, like, could we do that essentially straight from a source? Like basically, I created a management plan for a particular unit. It has all these restrictions associated with it. All those restrictions have these great monitoring elements. Can I just import that directly onto this property, you know, verbatim? So, and then you go through and you tweak it.
Any other questions or confusion? I feel like it always makes sense to me when we talk about it. And then when I started to clean up these the other day, it got kind of murky for me again. And I had to kind of pause and put all the pieces together.
All makes sense till you try to do it, right?
All right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's super clear to me for easements. And then I just had to think through, and there were a couple bugs that Chris fixed, so then that helped too. But it is very logical. I'm trying to remember, Chris, because we talked about a couple of weird edge cases, like maybe was it the farming licenses or
the farming license one is interesting. The other one was some kind of agreement. What was it?
Was it the BPA easement?
Yeah, it was that. I think the land use agreement.
Oh, the land use agreement. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we can start with the other one you just said.
The farming licenses. Yeah.
The farming license, and so kind of thinking through, like you basically have a permit to farm, and then that permit needs to be renewed each year. And so what do? Like, do you create a new restriction each year, or do you basically not represent it? You just keep extending the date of that restriction. And one of the ideas we had was that you would create, the restriction would be the farming permit. That's basically telling you who has given you the right to farm and who has that right. And then it would be a regulated restriction. And therefore, each year when you get it renewed, you would then create a new approval. And I've got the approval form up here, right here. And then if you have a file that's associated with that approval, some sort of signature or something, then you can put that right in the approval. And then everything can be kind of tied together. But that's just one way of doing it. I think there's other ways as well.
Yeah, I think this one got particularly confusing. Not necessarily, like these aren't all totally related to monitoring elements per se, but for this particular property, it has a BPA conservation easement because of funding. that restricts farming, but farming is allowed. When we purchased the property, the agreement was that we would be able to continue farming until we were able to fundraise the millions of dollars it will take to restore this property. And so BPA has a process where we have to get land use agreements for them, which are basically approvals to their conservation easement saying, yes, you can do this. They've now shifted, so we have to do it every year. So we have to it's just this accumulation of documents that are tied to the easement, but are also related to the license agreement. And so that's where it started to get, I had to really map out how does this work within this system. And like Chris said, I think that there's a couple of ways that it could work. And so I have to think through what am I looking for when I look at this?
And if anybody has, if they come up with these cases and they have questions, email them to us and we can talk about them. And then I'll be happy to add those to the help files so that people can see them in the future, this is the way we did this one, this is the way we did this other one. I think those are super helpful for people.
I'm a little behind the curve on things, but I'm wondering, particularly for organizations that maybe are going to be building out their stuff relatively slowly and they just need to sort of get it up and running. Is it easy to put something in as a restriction that basically says, okay, reference that document, or hey, there's this thing in there, or there's also this other layer, just sort of essentially as placeholders. Somebody goes out and okay, I got to look at the BPA thing. I got to look at this thing. I got to look at that thing, but they aren't built out to their specific restrictions yet, with the idea that they would be coming in later to fill that all out. Is that relatively easy to put in a generic way?
Yeah, and that's exactly how Adfality ended up in there. And whichever one of these is their restriction that has all of the different monitoring elements. They only have this one restriction. It's basically a C document type of restriction. And then there's this one source, and you can totally do that. And that's where, if you have, let's say that you have a set of monitoring element questions, essentially, that you want to apply to all units, all parcels or whatever, or maybe it's all easements and then a different one for all fee. Until we have those tools that, we should create that allows you to create them and apply them to everywhere, they're very easy for me to basically do and apply them to everything. So, but I think we should have the tool so that we can just, create this restriction, link it to everything, essentially.
I have a really general question if other people
Sure.
have questions. So for the monitoring elements, some of them are kind of negative impact observations, like dumping, and
Mm-hmm.
And so you say you observe dumping, you add the plus sign to add the new monitoring element observation and write details. When do you add, so the exclamation point is an issue?
Yeah, the exclamation point is an issue. It's basically letting you create an issue that's tied to that element, and then therefore ties back to that restriction.
So if you observe dumping or some kind of issue, would you just hit the exclamation point and fill out the details, or do you have to do it in a certain order? Do you have to do both?
I think you should create an observation, but ultimately, I think right now the issue is not tied to the observation, but to the element itself, which if people have opinions on that, we can modify it. We can have it tied to the observation specifically. So I'm open to that. When you do create an observation, we have the new issue. We have the issue down here as well. And then we've been toying around with this idea of essentially, adding a little bit more, allowing us to basically create a threshold. Like basically, if you answer potential violation, then you need to fill out an issue. Or if a continuous value, if it's over 5, you need to add an issue and add kind of stuff like that. But that would be mostly just to help people, you know, like kind of like not necessarily you who create the restrictions, but maybe your stewards who are in the field and remind them. So
backing up a hair, you're saying that when you create an issue that's related to building envelope as opposed to your observation of that there's a building
Yeah.
there. Is that correct? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but I could see it, you know, and I'm thinking about it, like having it tied specifically to the observation is sort of analogous to Jen, like the way that you guys were tying it to a task, you know, like it's tied to an event as opposed to just a thing, because it would still cascade all the way down back to restriction and stuff.
It could bring in that like first observed, you know, like that would make an easy linkage of that. One question I had, Chris, is can you go to the mobile for a second? Because I'm thinking about if you're doing this on a mobile and you do an observation and there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that sort of workflow through here. So if you wanted to create an issue for in the field, you'd have to go into issues and add it. And then would there be a way to then go in and link those two later?
Yes, we should. We should just add the button to this form. I mean, that is very easy to do. So I think our first thing would just, we'll add it to here. I think that, excuse me, I just write code. I don't talk all this much. I think we built the monitoring elements before we added issues to the mobile. And for those who may not have seen the mobile, we can go real quick. There's a map. You can enter a whole bunch of stuff. There's different layers that are associated with it. You can look at your tasks and you can create tasks and you can take pictures and link them to tasks. You can see all your contacts if you had contacts. And then there's this issues we added. This is showing you all the issues associated with this property. And recently we've updated this so that you can then also create tasks associated specifically with the issue, take pictures specifically for the issue as well. And so now that all that stuff's in there, we could very easily also add, you know, a button here that says, let me add an issue real quick. And that would basically let you type in a little bit of information and you can always fill the rest of it in later. So.
Could you show us in the desktop version how you would link an issue that's been created separately to monitoring?
Yeah. I don't know if we can. That's where I was going to go next. That we should make sure we can. I'm not positive off the top of my head that it is something we can achieve, because I think, let's see, I don't know if we have the link. So we would want to create a link up here, basically a way for us to say, instead of creating a new issue, let's find an issue and link it that way. And then I think we should also, from the actual issue page itself, from maybe in the admin, some way to tie it back to the actual observation.
Yeah, I would add that this is awesome. I have to make sure we wrap up on time because I have to go meet people in the field. But I just wanted to say that this, you know, having us all use it and think through these different scenarios is how we find all these little tiny missing pieces that we just maybe haven't thought of every button. I mean, Chris and I do this all the time. Like, is there a way to do this? Oh no, let me add it quick. Is there a way to unlink this? Because we have some of that where we migrated stuff in and it's wrong. And now it's like, oh, we got to move stuff around. And so this is the way, by both using the mobile and the desktop, that we find all those little pieces. So as you come across stuff like that, always just email us and share, or put it in the feature request or bugs or what have you, so that we can do that. And then, Chris, did you set it up so that everybody's getting their bug digests, or do we still have to?
Everyone should be.
Subscribe,
Like
okay.
if you submit a bug and then I do something with it, you should get an email about it. Because the bugs are sent to a different system, it's sort of different from, you know, your Oozle notifications. But you should, if I comment on it, if I finish it, you know, basically anything I attempt to do on it, you should get an annoying email from that hopefully then has a link in there that brings you back to the specific, the help file essentially, or the bug file. Real quick, because the only thing I think, other than adding some of these buttons, the change I think that has come up is potentially linking the issue to the observation as opposed to the element. Do we have a show of hands that do not want to do that? And a show of hands that do think we should do that? No one cares.
I want to
like
think
it.
about it.
Okay, then I won't change anything. You can think about it.
I think I think in general, I like the observation link. Where I was hesitating, it is imagining dealing with old issues, but like we should be able to dial in when we found it, if that's the way that we found it. So I think it would be fine.
Be forced.
Right.
It won't be a forced thing by any means, and so it won't be something that has to happen.
Right.
And therefore, for old stuff, there's no reason to do it. So really, it's just sugar for the most part. Like when you way down the road, being able to trace it back to a particular observation might be reasonably helpful.
I like the idea of being able to have it accessible through the observation, because as people start using this and get used to it, they're going to get most comfortable with the observation side of it, working out in the field. They're going to, okay, all I have to do is check that. But if you can also get to it from other directions, awesome. Otherwise, it's being able to like link it to there, get it going. And then somebody who knows more after that point can get involved and help out from that point.
Okay.
There was just something else. Issues. Oh, I was just going to say, you know, we still have a bunch of stuff to clean up with issues. You know, so one of the things that we've done is go through and kind of create different issue checklists for different issue types. So that's something also just to kind of be thinking about in the background. And I think we have an issues webinar that we need to schedule at some point, right? So.
Yeah, and then figuring out, since you got to go, what we want to do. So so the next workshop, essentially, like what do we want to do for the next workshop?
It was tied on the survey with, and you all get to vote since you're the ones that showed up, but it was tied with mobile and annual monitoring and photo points work. Anybody have any strong preference over? Yeah.
I feel like mobile covers kind of both, since mobile is mostly used because we do photo points within mobile, right? And
yeah, but what I was thinking is it probably would be helpful for people to go through, like maybe there's questions generally about annual monitoring, but to go through sort of the workflow for creating photo points, editing photo points, adding and editing views, that kind of, you know, like the some of the setup, I wonder if it's confusing for people. Particularly, I know that you're still working on the beta, the new one, but that would probably be helpful once that comes online. But maybe folks are rolling with that. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. So then let's do annual monitoring. Focus that one, and then we'll discuss mobile as it relates to it. And mobile should be pretty straightforward because it's just basically tiny little versions of what's already in the desktop, essentially.
I feel like mobile's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Do we have access to mobile?
Yeah. So it's just simply, so for you, it would be m.nclc.oozle.land. So basically just an m dot before your normal URL.
And if you use an iPhone, maybe download Chrome for now. But it should be your same login and yeah. Chris,
try it on Safari. I want to find out, like I haven't had any of these issues. So if if a brand spanking new, like you try it on Safari and it doesn't work, let me know, and then we can figure it out.
And I think for me, it was working on Safari. What wasn't working was the mapping. Like, remember, I couldn't get tracks to work. Like it wouldn't request my location, and it was being super fussy with that stuff. So that's why I started using.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of issues with how Safari and Chrome deal with the world, essentially. And essentially, it's what it boils down to is it asks for your permission to like use the gyroscope, use the GPS location, and use the camera. Because with the mobile, it's tracking, it has your location, but it's also trying to use the gyroscope for which direction you're pointing to help you a little bit with the actual photo point stuff. So, okay.
We have to wrap up. I still have to gather all my things for the field. Thanks, you
Sorry.
guys. Hopefully this was helpful. We'll record it. And then if things come up, please let us know so we can keep troubleshooting through this stuff.
Bye, guys.
Awesome.
Thank
Good
you.
to see your faces.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.